Part 4. The Seeker. Success is becoming who you want to be. Wallace Wattles. It was a July day. Despite our harsh winters in Yakutia, we do get hot summers, even if they are a bit short. The sky to one side was covered with dark storm clouds. Lightning flashed, and the occasional rumble of thunder was heard. On the other side was a vast expanse of sky covered with white clouds, the sun hidden somewhere behind them. The wind picked up, and the first heavy drops fell. They grew more frequent, turning into a summer downpour. I stood on the balcony listening to One by U2, which was coming through the open door to the room. The warm drops of rain fell on my face. The lightning drew closer and closer. The thunder rumbled louder. And then the sun broke through the clouds, shining brightly down onto the balcony where I stood. I don't know how exactly, but it all came together in a single instant. The thunder and the rain, the ray of sun and the music, and I knew I wasn't going to give up. I would overcome these failures, the depression and the loss of motivation, step by step. I would become self-actualized and do what I had to do in life and find myself. This was a turning point for me. After that day, I pulled myself together and began slowly working to find a way out of the hole I was in. Meanwhile, as the popularity and influence of YKT.RU grew and the portal became one of Yakutia's top media resources, conflicts with the government and various political groups became more frequent. By this point, we had already established our basic principles as a media resource, and we had a wide range of measures to counter various forms of pressure. One of these principles was a ban on any kind of pre-election advertising, whether paid or free, pro-government or opposition. I began to distance myself from the local elite, so as to not give them any additional reason to call or write with requests to remove or publish something on the portal. Our most effective instrument against any type of pressure was that YKT.RU wrote the truth and gave all sides an opportunity to state their case. Everyone knew that we never practiced censorship, smear campaigns, or any type of advertising masked as journalism. We tried to maintain freedom of speech on the portal. If posts don't break the law or portal rules, and they don't contain slander or unethical intrusion into the private lives of other people, then these are opinions, thoughts, and ideas that people have the right to express. There were already too few places left in Russia where this could still be done. We believed in the power of independent media sources, and that they assist in the development of civil society. If a deputy mayor gives a businessman half a land plot for a future school for special needs as a bribe, or a drunk state assembly deputy crashes into a group of pedestrians, killing some and disabling others, and the pro-government media keeps quiet or notes these facts in small print at the corner of the screen, well, this is just plain wrong. Such news has to reach everyone, and the public response can be leveraged to ensure that there will be consequences for wrongdoers' actions. And then the next deputy mayor or state assembly deputy will think twice before risking his or her career and freedom this way. That's how the media can assist in societal development and make life better for people. Even worse than the state media, which is at least honest in its loyalty to the government, are certain smaller news publications that will write absolutely anything for a price. It's both funny and revolting to see a paper like that publish a gushing puff piece about some entrepreneur deputy one week, only to write the exact opposite the next week. It turns out that the first piece was a play to extend a current contract that was coming to an end, and the second was published after the client decided to stop paying for the deputy's services. These things disgrace and kill real journalism, and corrupt journalists, especially the younger generation, who come to accept these practices as the norm after observing their more senior colleagues at work. In this sense, I can say without false modesty that YKT.RU was a boon to civil society and independent journalism in Yakutia. The portal was supported by a strong, financially independent company, consisting of a team of IT professionals with positive values and principles aimed at improving the lives of others. The history of business is primarily one of people's intelligence and inner strength. The larger the business and the higher the goals, the more exceptional the intelligence and strength must be. There is no generally accepted definition of intelligence, but the best I've read is from the American business writer Robert Kiyosaki. Intelligence is the ability to make finer distinctions. In other words, if people see only black and white, good and evil, 0 and 1, then they are not highly intelligent. If they see, say, 0.7, things are looking better. And if their intelligence enables them to see distinctions all the way to 0.721526, they've hit excellence. This capability helps people accurately assess situations in their lives and find strong responses and actions. In my opinion, intelligence consists of two main elements. The first is the mind we were given from birth, a gift from nature. It's like physical beauty. Here, I have to agree with Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who has said that being naturally smart isn't anything to boast about, as it isn't something you had any control over. Kindness and honesty are different matters, as they are completely within your control, and if you demonstrate them, you have something to be proud of. The second element of intelligence is the totality of your knowledge and experience. Together, your natural brain power and your knowledge make up the intelligence that enables you to see the finer distinctions in life. While it can be difficult to develop the mind, knowledge and experience are a limitless field for development, giving people the opportunity to strengthen their own intelligence. People also emerge from childhood with different levels of inner strength. Some are strong and responsible at 16, while others are still spoiled children at 25. But inner strength can be built up through targeted exercise, the same as physical strength. A highly intelligent person with reserves of inner strength has much higher chances of success when building a business and in entrepreneurship, because it is a heuristic process with a great degree of uncertainty and involves many high-stress situations that require quick decision-making. Studies indicate that the average age of successful entrepreneurs is 42 to 45. At that age, entrepreneurs have accumulated enough experience and enhanced their intelligence while doing so, and can respond calmly to challenges and stressful situations, while still having sufficient physical strength and energy to work long hours. I started my first business when I was just over 20, and I realized immediately that I was lacking several key skills. Most importantly, social skills. As a typical programmer and introvert, with a severe stutter since childhood, I avoided interacting with strangers and any public speaking. It was my intelligence and inner strength that enabled me to run my small business more or less successfully. In addition, with an IT business, in-person communication can be replaced by written messages through email and chat, which was a great help to me. But as my company grew, it became clear that I had to engage in some self-development and transformation as well. And this personal crisis was the stimulus I needed to take action. There's a psychological approach called the life balance wheel. A circle is divided into various sectors, which correspond to important areas of life, such as career, family, health, and so forth. After that, you are supposed to analyze the current state of affairs in those areas, creating a visualization and understanding of which areas require development. I use a similar technique I call the lifogram. You take a circle, split it into 8 or 16 sections, and assign to each section a quality that's important to you. These could be qualities like intelligence, emotional intelligence, professionalism, social skills, accuracy, responsibility, willpower, and so on. After that, rate yourself on these qualities in each section from 0 to 10, where 0 is very weak and 10 is very strong. Because many of us are prone to either self-deprecation or self-aggrandizement, get help from people who know you well and ask them to rate you in these areas. It's best to set this up so that the participants can add their contributions anonymously, so they won't inflate their ratings. You could, for example, have a party, and before everyone starts drinking, ask them to honestly write their ratings down and toss them in a hat. Taking the average from all these scores and your own will give you a more objective final reading. Enter these values on the scale in the appropriate section of your circle, and then draw a straight line connecting these points in different sections. The broken figure in the center of the circle is a visual representation of your personality. The more highly developed and balanced your personality, the larger the size of the figure as it extends to the edges of the circle. A less developed personality would be represented by a smaller figure, hunching toward the center. You can see on the lifogram which skills and qualities need the most work. Then you can choose several of the most problematic skills and start systematic exercises to improve them. When choosing an area to work on, you may want to consider which skills are most important for your career, or which skills will lead to the automatic improvement of others. Choose 1 or 2, 3 at most, and work on them for a year. At the end of that year, rate yourself again, and choose the next categories for development for the year ahead. Within 3 to 4 years, you will see that you've made significant progress in your personal growth and have become a stronger and more balanced person. In my case, my problem areas at the start of this process were my social skills and my physical shape. I already mentioned the issue with social skills above. And as for physical exercise, I'd always had a difficult relationship with sports. In cross-country races at school, I'd come in second to last, gasping for air. My natural clumsiness prevented me from getting very far with gymnastics, soccer, or basketball. And who enjoys being bad at something? Eventually, I did everything I could to get out of gym class in high school and college, bringing in fake doctor's notes or just skipping class. The lack of physical activity, sedentary work, and poor eating habits led to weight gain. At a height of 5 foot 11 inches, I was approaching 210 pounds, which I was not thrilled about. So, I picked those qualities first: social skills and fitness. Social skills, like many others, can be best strengthened by intentionally putting yourself into stressful situations. Or to use the cliched but accurate phrase, by getting out of your comfort zone. What I found to be most effective was a high volume of communication with strangers and setting up extreme communication situations. The first meant forcing myself to communicate every day, trying to find something in common with people of all different ages, ethnicities, and social status. An example of the second was when, on a trip to a different city, I put on the hotel bathrobe backwards, tied the sleeves behind my back, and walked down the street to the nearest mall. I went to the food court, stood on a chair, and began belting out an operatic aria until I saw security guards approaching, at which point I had to make tracks. Another technique was to walk around and ask strangers to loan me their personal debit cards for an hour. To start out, the rule is not to give any additional information, just ask. But you do run the risk of trouble with the police in this situation. So you should have a convincing explanation if it looks like things are about to go south. The simplest thing to do then is tell the truth. I'm shy. It causes me difficulty in life, and this is an exercise I'm doing to help me improve my social skills. After such extreme experiences, you start to feel much calmer and more confident in ordinary situations. I chose cycling to get in shape. There was a friendly cycling club in Yakutsk that regularly went on rides out of the city. I liked the combination of sports and interesting travel. The first ride of a pathetic 15 miles one Saturday felt like the Tour de France to me. Gradually, after cycling every weekend, I started to get fit. The following year, I helped to set the Yakutsk Club's record for ride distance in a single day. We rode 125 miles on a hot July day. When I got home that night, I shambled over to the fridge like a zombie, drank down a 30 fluid-ounce jar of lingonberry jam in one gulp, wandered to bed, and passed out in my clothes for about 14 hours. After a couple of years, my communication skills had noticeably improved, and my weight had dropped to an acceptable 175 pounds. The lifogram works. Meanwhile, I began to confront my personal crisis in earnest. I read everything on the topic of happiness: books, articles, blogs. As it turned out, the leading definitions of happiness from researchers came down to approximately the same thing. People are happy when they live the way they want, receive from life what they expect, and when positive emotions prevail over negative ones. From this, it follows that a person could be happy living in a remote mountain cave with no material possessions, living very simply, eating only flatbread and drinking spring water, and admiring the sunrise and sunset. And a multimillionaire of high social status can be deeply unhappy. The first person is living as he or she wants, while the second is not. This definition, along with various techniques, can help you understand how to be happier. The subject of happiness and ways to achieve it is very engaging and profound, with new aspects constantly catching my interest. It became clear to me that to get out of my depressive state, to be happier, I had to understand how I wanted to live. This was a simple but important insight. Then I started looking for a psychologist who would be able to help me deal with my depression. I quickly discovered a lack of skilled, experienced psychologists. One allegedly experienced psychologist in Yakutsk, for example, supposedly there to help me, spent our time pouring his own heart out to me. But all psychologists, after listening to me attentively, would ask kindly, "And what do you think you should do?" "Huh? That's what I came to see you for." I learned that it's a violation of their professional ethics to offer advice. They can only ask questions that help their clients find the solutions on their own. But this was not the right approach for me. I finally got the help I needed with an experienced psychologist from Moscow, who my friend, also a tech entrepreneur, recommended to me. This psychologist listened to me, and in addition to asking leading questions, used other methods of psychotherapy, as I later realized. She gave me direct advice. Go buy these vitamins at the pharmacy. They have zinc that will help you when you feel like this. Write a letter to your father in childhood, but don't send it. Keep it in your desk. Do something that lets you experience a different social status for a day. That was the first time I worked as a taxi driver, by the way. I did it for several days and I found it very interesting. And wonder of wonders, after about 10 sessions, it was as if a stone fell from my soul. As always, an experienced professional using intelligence and knowledge was highly effective. So, I gradually emerged from my depression and was able to get back into a fairly normal routine of work and life. But the big question remained unanswered. Who am I? And why am I doing all this? In other companies, if the founder and leader entered a serious personal crisis and started working less, it could create a risky situation, causing confusion and destabilization. But in our case, the company culture helped prevent that. In a team, as with any friendly and caring family, it's important to create and maintain traditions. At Sonnet, this included the company's birthday, which we celebrated each March with a snow fest, involving winter sports. At InDriver, we celebrate in June with a summer festival. We usually spend all day outdoors, playing group games, sports, or paintballing, then grill kebabs, make rice pilaf, and enjoy some good food. This is not just for fun. It serves the important purpose of welcoming new members into our ranks. This is how we do it. The new team members get down on one knee, put their hands to their hearts, and repeat a special oath after the high priestess, a role played by a longtime and well-liked employee, in which they promise to do good, assist in global development, and adhere to the company's values. Then they kiss the flag that we sewed in our company's first year, and we throw them, fully clothed, into the water in summer, or the snow in winter. It's important that our employees' families and children join us at this celebration, and that we hold them on a working day. I've always believed that the weekend is for people to spend on their personal lives and families. Work and business are important, but there's nothing more important in life than the people close to us and the time we spend with them. We have a fun company party for the National New Year, where we reward employees who have done particularly well the preceding year. We organize it like the Oscars. There are several categories, with nominees and grand prize winners for each category, and each receives a golden badge in the shape of our logo. All grand prize winners receive cash bonuses, in addition to honor and glory, of course, and they wear their badges with pleasure at company events, almost like medals. As soon as it was feasible for the company, we started taking the team on athletic trips once a year to sea or ski resorts. We went to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, Shimbulak in Kazakhstan, Boracay Island in the Philippines, the Gudari Ski Resort in Georgia, and Koh Samet in Thailand. The company covered 70% of the cost of the trips. I can't express how great it is to see your accountants, programmers, and marketers relaxing under palm trees, or standing on skis and snowboards for the first time in their lives. And it's a much better use of business profits than, a luxury SUV for me or the company. It's a shame we can't do company vacations now that we have more than 1,000 employees, but our different offices do organize separate trips. Several times a year, the employees have a fun day, choosing a different theme each time. It might be Halloween or gangster style. The confused clients visiting our office that day have to discuss business matters with vampires, zombies, or gangsters, notorious local criminals in their characteristic caps carrying bats. Of course, the intelligent, kind faces of the tech nerds still show through the costumes. These traditions help maintain a family atmosphere in our growing company and unite the team, creating a positive environment. It also helps promote the company more widely. On our celebration and trip days, the social network feeds are clogged with our photos. This may cause some grumbling from people who are tired of seeing so much of us in one day. But the most common comment on those posts is, "I want to work there." All this helped me get through the most acute stage of my personal crisis unscathed. Over the long New Year's holiday of 2012, it was cold in Yakutsk, with temperatures reaching -40 to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. For residents of the city, this felt uncomfortably low in contrast with the milder temperatures of recent decades that were attributed to global warming. I remember the temperatures hitting -75 degrees Fahrenheit fairly often when I was in elementary and middle school. Classes would be canceled on those days due to the low temperatures. Not that this prevented us from playing hockey all day in the courtyards of our apartment buildings and taking breaks to eat ice cream. Most taxi services in the city took advantage of the cold snap and dramatically hiked their rates overnight. This clear collusion outraged the city. The different taxi services had collectively raised their rates before, but this immediate 50% increase was too high. Its timing during the cold snap also made the move look even more cynical. As it stood, their customer service was already deplorable. The dispatcher would promise you a car in 5 minutes, but they'd actually keep you waiting for half an hour more before a beater with a rude driver and a smoky interior finally showed up. Or they might not send a car at all, telling you off in no uncertain but definitely obscene terms, and no longer answering your calls. So, as far as the city residents could see, the only reason taxi services were raising their rates was simple: cynical greed. Because all the main taxi services were in it together, customers had no choice but to either walk in the -50 Fahrenheit temperatures or accept and pay the new rate. At least that's what the taxi companies thought. But, unexpectedly, their move triggered a series of events that led to the disappearance of over 90% of the taxi services in Yakutsk within the next few months. On the social network VK.com, popular in Russia, a 20-year-old college student named Alexander Pavlov created a small group, inviting his friends with cars, other students like himself, to join. They started offering rides to other members of the group at pre-increased taxi prices. It worked like this. The group administrator would create a new post titled something like, "Rides for February 25th, evening." In the comments, passengers would write the details of their trips and offer a price. The bidding mechanism, price offers by the passengers, developed naturally. The drivers sat in their cars, constantly updating the browser on the screens of their smartphones, hoping to be the first to see a profitable request. After they selected a job, they had to quickly find the telephone number of the rider, copy it, enter it into their phone, and then called a passenger before the other drivers could. The agreement was concluded in that phone conversation. For lucrative jobs, other drivers might continue to call a passenger after a deal had been struck, only to discover that a driver had already been found. Pavlov called the group the Association of Independent Drivers Yakutsk, or the Russian language acronym SNV for short. In an unforeseen turn of events, without any advertising, thousands of users began joining the group. Moreover, people were registering with the social network just to use this service, both passengers and drivers. In a matter of months, the group had gained tens of thousands of members, generating a couple thousand rides a day. For Yakutsk, with its official population of 320,000, this group quickly became a noticeable and powerful social phenomenon. At first, I, influenced by stereotypes about the taxi industry, professional drivers, contracts under the labor code, drivers' background checks, pre-trip inspections, and so on, believed SNV to be an unsafe service. You wouldn't know who was coming to pick you up among the private drivers with unknown histories and driving records and cars of all models, colors, and ages. But over an entire year since the group's founding, with thousands of rides every day, not a single dangerous or criminal incident occurred, nor were there any major accidents. The group continued to grow, reaching 50,000 members and climbing, consisting of mostly passengers. The number of drivers, drawn in by the increasing pool of orders and the absence of any obstacles to starting work, also grew with each passing day. All you needed was a car and a smartphone with an internet connection. Competition grew for the best rides. Because these could be won or lost in a fraction of a second, drivers started recruiting so-called navigators, friends and relatives whose job was to update the group feed constantly and to pick up a suitable order as soon as possible. With a navigator on board, the number of open seats in a passenger car went down to 3. Besides, many passengers didn't like to see a driver pull up with someone else in the car. This was especially true for female passengers, who weren't happy to see 2 men arrive to pick them up at night. In Yakutsk, we spent the first few years of our business fighting against the presence of navigators, as drivers had gotten so used to having a companion. As the popularity of the Association of Independent Drivers surged, with the general love and support for it, particularly among the younger generation, and the lack of any major problems, it became clear to me that this was a possible basis for a tech startup, and that the general setup was safe. This is a key point. An entrepreneur has to be able to view new opportunities through the lens of intuition as well as logic. This is one of the few aspects of entrepreneurship closer to art than science. Once you've made a decision, you have to act decisively on the basis of experience and knowledge, and that's where the science kicks in. After discussing it at Senet, and despite some objections and doubts from top managers, I decided to act. We had several meetings with Pavlov, and he agreed to sell the Association of Independent Drivers for $10,000, which meant transferring the login and password for the super administrator of the group. A convincing argument for him was that other groups had started to pop up on VK.com, and people were creating simple mobile apps that automatically downloaded jobs from SNV. This gave drivers a significant advantage in the speed with which they were able to contact passengers, and there was a mass movement over to apps. One of these apps even introduced a subscription fee, earning good money off someone else's group in essence. The next step was obviously getting passengers to move over to the apps as well, given that the standard functionality of a social network page was not a convenient user interface for this service. The prospect of someone else seizing the initiative and luring away SNV members to an external mobile app loomed. Pavlov had no skills or experience in IT and wasn't able to lead the transition of the group to a mobile app. He had no advantages over the creators of the apps, apart from the power to make official announcements in the group. It was a good deal for him. We shook on it, paid him the money, and control over the Association of Independent Drivers Yakutsk was ours. During our conversation with him, it was obvious that Sasha Pavlov was a sharp, capable guy. We met up several months later. He had already graduated and had a job installing video surveillance systems. I immediately offered him a job with us at InDriver. The work of installation was too simple for someone of his abilities, even for a starter job. Plus, it was only logical and fair that the creator of the service prototype should be involved in its further development. As time has shown, this was an excellent decision. Sasha became one of the key managers and shareholders at the company. He is truly a find and an irreplaceable member of our team, with his ability to accurately comprehend all the nuances and subtleties of our service. We didn't have to buy the group. There was nothing particularly novel about the model it was using. Street taxis in those days operated along precisely the same lines. You would stick your arm out to wave down a car, say your destination, and offer a price. The driver would either agree or offer his own higher price. As an experienced team of IT specialists, we could simply have developed and launched an app based on that model and advertised via ykt.ru and other platforms to drum up a critical mass of users. But I decided that buying the group would help us to achieve this more quickly and effectively. It also helped reduce the risk of a potential competitor emerging on the basis of SNV. And at the end of the day, buying the group was a more decent move than simply copying a model that had proved to be popular. After buying the Association of Independent Drivers, it was clear to us that our first step should be to develop a simple free mobile app that allowed drivers to conveniently pick up jobs, as was featured on the existing apps. And we needed to do it quickly, before the creators of those external apps seized the initiative. To start, we needed to come up with a name for the project. After long discussions, we settled on the most obvious, InDriver, an abbreviation of independent drivers. Choosing names for companies, websites, and mobile apps is a whole separate topic. An analysis in 2015 of the names of the top 100 global brands found that one name, Xerox, was suggested by a professor of classical languages, and one was developed by a creative agency, BlackBerry. But the names of the remaining 98 companies came from their founders or the founders' friends. This shows that the company's own team does the best job of coming up with a good name. Because ykt.ru is a web project that predated mobile apps, we needed a new team of developers for InDriver. We were lucky. We found iOS and Android developers pretty quickly, Mikhail Androsev and Mikhail Arbanev. They had both come to programming fairly recently, but went on to become top-notch directors of their respective development subdivisions in the company. Experienced Sonnet engineers were on hand to help them, and the prototyping was done by Sonnet designers, headed by art director Yuri Kostenka. The team quickly developed and launched our first convenient and free app for drivers in the summer of 2013, which automatically loaded the jobs from our group on vk.com, making the development of other apps pointless. Those drivers who preferred using apps instead of vk.com to get jobs soon transferred to our app because it was easier to use and free. In addition, everyone saw that a regional IT leader had taken over the project and had control over the Association of Independent Drivers group. This stripped potential competitors of motivation and strength. The threat of losing the initiative had been eliminated, and the first half of our operation to protect our nascent project was a success. But the main action and the greater risk still lay ahead. Our task was not just to transfer passengers from a social media group to a mobile app. In essence, what we had to do was alter patterns of behavior that had formed over the year and a half since the group's founding. A difficult endeavor. Habit really is second nature to users of applications and online services. We also had to make the app viable on the two main platforms, iOS and Android, for two separate categories of users, passengers and drivers. The app had to be of high quality right from the start, with an interface that was convenient to use and free of bugs, to maintain our good reputation. With new apps, like new people, first impressions are key and difficult to change later. And the project was on the shoulders of a recently formed team without much experience working on apps. We completed app development and the marketing materials by November, made other final preparations, and on November 17, 2013, began the operation to transfer users over to the mobile app. I worked as a driver during the initial period to see how the app was working, and talked to passengers to make sure everything was going smoothly for them. I usually went out in a company car, but sometimes I didn't have the chance to switch cars and took my personal BMW X6. It was entertaining to observe the reactions of passengers, expecting a basic Japanese car like a Toyota Corolla when I pulled up. The passengers sometimes circled the BMW a couple times before getting in to make sure that it was the car they had called. When they got in, they were usually a little tense, relaxing only when I explained that I worked at InDriver and was conducting interviews with users of our service. For the first couple weeks, passengers could book rides on the app and through the group as before. Orders came from both sources and showed up on the mobile apps for drivers. The app didn't have a map. Drivers entered in their starting and ending location manually. To accept a job, a driver called the passenger to discuss the details, as before. But it was much easier and simpler to do. They just clicked on an order in their feed, without having to copy and paste the passenger's telephone number. To our relief, many passengers were soon convinced of the greater convenience a specialized mobile application provided in comparison to the standard functionality of a social network, and began to switch over. The app was well made and operated without glitches. We waited until about half the passengers and most of the drivers had switched to the app. And one fine December day, nearly 2 years after the Association of Independent Drivers first appeared, we stopped incoming orders there. From that moment, orders were accepted only through the app. Within a few months, orders and rides had tripled, thanks to the increased convenience we were offering, and an extensive advertising campaign on ykt.ru and other sites, exceeding 10,000 rides per day. People had accepted the service. InDriver was born. As I continued working my way out of my personal crisis and came to understand the nature of happiness, I began intentionally surrounding myself with people whose company I found interesting and comfortable, and to do the things I really wanted to do. I rearranged my apartment, getting rid of a pile of unnecessary stuff, and most of my clothes. I started doing more of what I enjoyed, spending time with my children, reading books, taking ski trips, and playing volleyball and soccer. I also continued to use the Lifeogram for personal development, and now focused on inner spiritual growth, with an emphasis on mindfulness and cheerfulness, as well as on improving my communication skills. For the first goal, I met and consulted with various experts on psychology and spiritual practices, and went to a few training courses on personal growth, including psychologically stressful courses. I find this type of training useful and risk-free for a mature person, although I'd avoid organizations with a questionable reputation or of a sectarian or religious nature. But in general, to get into the highest levels of business, an entrepreneur needs either fabulous, one-in-a-million luck, or to move independently into the highest levels of personal and spiritual growth. To improve my communication skills, I attended a series of traditional courses and masterclasses, oration, public speaking, foreign languages. I took a long course on getting rid of a stutter, for which you have to remain silent for a week, spend a week speaking slowly at a third of your normal pace, and then pick up speed gradually over time, as if learning to speak again. But my energetic nature made it difficult to speak slowly, and I put only perfunctory effort into following the process. Maybe that's why the course didn't have an effect on my stutter. During all these trainings, courses, and consultations, I found myself in Kiev for a 3-day course on communication techniques. Kiev is a beautiful ancient city I had visited before. This time, however, it was January 2014, and Euromaidan was in full swing throughout the city. It was all the Russian and global media were talking about. I reserved a room through the internet, choosing a hotel in the center. I flew into Borispol Airport in the evening, got a taxi, and gave the driver the address. He dropped me off in front of some huge barricades, telling me that my hotel was across the square and that cars couldn't approach. I paid and got out. The air smelled of smoke and bonfires. There was a narrow passage through the barricades, guarded by several dour men in camouflage, wearing ski and motorcycle helmets. They were armed with clubs and bats. Hoping that they would be uninterested in an apparently peaceful Japanese-looking nerd in glasses, I cautiously squeezed by them. Behind the barricades was a boulevard full of tents. I walked to the end and came out onto Independence Square, Kiev's main square, and a startling sight. The huge square was packed with people, and there were tents and campfires everywhere. People were cooking over fires and barrels. Tents of various sizes bore the names of Ukrainian cities. A large stage had been set up by one of the buildings lining the square, which held a large screen, bright in the evening darkness. People were holding a rally there. I could only catch snatches of the speech, something like, "Independent European state. Ukraine isn't Russia or Belarus." I took some photos, then went looking for my hotel, which I found not far off the square. The next day, the journalists at ykt.ru saw the photos I'd posted on the company chat, got excited, and asked me to do a more thorough report, since I was right there in the epicenter of events. I promised to do so on my next free day, after the training course was over. I was interested myself to see what was going on there. On a free day, as promised, I went over to Independence Square. This time I spoke to the people there, trying to understand their motives and goals. I soon realized that Maidan was split into two main areas. The first consisted of a permanent tent city and rallies in Independence Square, while the second was situated close by, on Hrushevsky Street, the site of increasingly violent clashes between the demonstrators and police. Through my interviews in Independence Square, I gathered that most of the people there were members of the intellectual class, teachers, doctors, and IT professionals, most middle-aged or elderly. They were drawn to protest by their dissatisfaction with President Viktor Yanukovych's government. They called the current authorities a criminal gang, giving examples of injustice and illegal actions. The more radical protesters were concentrated on Hrushevsky Street. The atmosphere there was entirely different. I felt as if I were in a war zone. The air was thick with the smoke of burning tires. From time to time, I heard the explosion of stun grenades. Many young men and older ones stood on top of the high barricades, wearing medical masks, respirators, and a variety of helmets, armed with whatever they could find. They all watched the other side of the street, where the police and special forces stood, shields together. It was still a few weeks before the real shooting and the mass casualties would begin. For now, the conflict was limited to the throwing of stones and Molotov cocktails on the part of the demonstrators and tear gas from the Berkut, the name of the Ukrainian riot police, and the police. The first casualty from a clash between the two sides had occurred several days prior, however, and the atmosphere was electrified. I took photographs, recorded a few brief interviews, wrote up a quick text, and sent it back to the team. The next morning, I flew out of Kiev. My story on ykt.ru garnered significant interest and response. Comments varied from, "Thank you for your uncensored objective reporting," to, "Now the true traitor's face of ykt.ru has been revealed." Many wrote that for true objectivity, we needed to hear from residents of other Ukrainian cities and regions, not just in Kiev. So we decided to send a reporter from news.ykt.ru to Ukraine, especially because the situation there was heating up and attracting international attention, including from the people of Yakutia. In March, our reporter visited Kiev, Donetsk, Lviv, and Sevastopol in Crimea. As expected, there was a diversity of opinion. In Donetsk and Sevastopol, the residents were opposed to Euromaidan, while in Kiev and Lviv, the majority supported the movement. Our journalist reported what he observed, describing the attitudes of the Ukrainians he met, without adding his own opinions and without distortion. Our comment feed also displayed a variety of reactions, from total support to furious criticism. The publication of this series set off a chain of events. I was removed from the Council of the President of Yakutia on Regional IT Development, where I had served as Deputy Director under the President. Then members of the security forces wanted to ask me why we had done that reporting, and to what end, and strongly recommended that we avoid the explosive and unpredictable topic of Ukraine. Much later, I was told that FSB, ex-KGB operatives, had flown from Moscow to Yakutsk, where they carried out video and audio surveillance on me for a period of time, as well as going through all my corporate and personal financial transactions. After they were convinced that everything was above board, no hostile foreign influence to be found, they left. And our valiant leaders in Yakutia, hearing of the investigation, removed me from the IT Council, just in case, as a precautionary measure. If we had known the dramatic course events would take in Ukraine, how toxic and painful this subject would become, YKT.RU wouldn't have gotten involved. But in life, we never know what awaits us in the future. And this experience was also valuable. But this was all still in the future for us. Meanwhile, at the start of 2014, our main event of note was the monetization of InDriver. Drivers in Yakutsk were now paying for access to ride requests, divided into 24-hour slots. This created an instant significant revenue stream, and the company was making a profit. It's been profitable ever since, a key difference between InDriver and many other major ride-hailing companies, which operate at a loss for years. February 2014 was also when we conducted the first test launches of our service outside of Yakutsk. We chose 9 cities at random in Russia's Far East and in eastern Siberia. We then added them to the app and put about $10,000 into ad campaigns in each city. InDriver began showing good growth in 2 cities. Passengers liked the app, and they discussed it actively with their social circle. They pulled more drivers in, attracted by the growing order volume. We took success in 2 out of 10 cities as a positive indicator, given the simple functionality of the app, minimal advertising budgets, and the lack of any well-established business processes or launch experience. Most importantly, we saw the same organic audience growth through word of mouth as in Yakutsk. We had WhatsApp as a recent example of a service that gained a huge number of users in record time without paying a dime in advertising. InDriver was proving to be more than a local phenomenon, and it looked like we had the potential to build a larger network. In general, I believe the only way to build truly wide-scale success in an online business is through organic growth. When a product is so engaging, useful, or entertaining that people are happy to start using it and encourage their social network to try it out. We redoubled our efforts to find all the programmers, designers, and marketing specialists our team needed to finalize the app and prepare for new launches. Several experienced and talented executives moved from Sonet to InDriver. Igor Fedorov, the Chief Operations Officer, who swiftly became my right-hand man at the new company. Yuri Kostenka, Chief Product Officer, and Marina Arzhikova, Head of Growth. They significantly strengthened the team when they came on board. By summer, we were launching the service in a new city every month, traveling for each launch, gradually gaining expertise, and training our team. From the moment that the Association of Independent Drivers turned into InDriver and we began introducing it to new cities, I was faced with the question of how to finance this new startup. On the one hand, it was a small team. There were no expenditures yet for expansion, and the project began to cover its own expenses almost immediately, even turning a small profit. On the other hand, it was a classic startup case, and it was tempting to try and develop the company by attracting investment, instead of diverting funds from Sonet. So, I decided to look for investors. This was a first in my career as an entrepreneur. I initially approached the Yakutia Venture Company, recently created by the regional government, and offered them the company for an investment of $200,000, implying I was valuing the whole company at just under $1 million, according to the exchange rate at the time. As a counterproposal, the management of the fund offered me an interest-bearing loan, with my personal apartment as collateral, Clearly, despite its name, this was not a venture capital company. Next, we turned our attention to the Internet Initiatives Development Fund, IIDF, a prominent organization in Russia, new at the time, which focused on pre-seed and seed investments. InDriver completed its first online accelerator, the only time it was conducted remotely, with the team's presence in Moscow not required. All our work with IIDF came down, in essence, to a single video call, during which I talked to the tracker assigned to us, a 20-year-old who attempted to pass on some allegedly cutting-edge information on the development of IT startups. He may well have had some valuable know-how to pass on, but our conversation felt to me like I, a seasoned polar wolf, was listening to a poodle puppy trying to teach me how to hunt. So I gave this new trainer the attention I felt he deserved. That is, none. After that, our only communication with IIDF was through the reports we submitted for the several months the accelerator lasted. Even with this effort, we made only because the fund promised to pick several projects at the end, to which they would present investment proposals and set up networking opportunities with other investment funds. But this was all for naught. IIDF determined that the remote format was ineffective and rejected all the startups from their online accelerator without making a single funding offer. And so we missed the opportunity to acquire $50,000 from IIDF in exchange for a 7.5% share in our company. More precisely, IIDF missed the opportunity. After that, in the summer, we went to professional Russian venture capital funds, where we began to have more serious conversations about financing. Friends gave me an Excel spreadsheet with the email addresses of active investors, and I wrote about 20 of them. 8 funds responded, and I met with half of those. At the end of this process, InDriver had 2 potential investors from Moscow with real interest in the company, Frontier Venture and one other. They both began making offers around the same time, and I played on the competition between them to reach the most advantageous terms I could. Investment of $2 million with a post-money valuation of InDriver at $7 million, a significantly better capitalization value than what we were getting from the Yakutia Venture Company and IIDF. It's important to create competition during fundraising. It can lead to much better terms and offers to the startup. We ended up signing a term sheet, a preliminary agreement with Frontier Ventures. Their managing partner, Dmitry Alamov, was quite interested in InDriver. At our first lunch together, he told me that our company had growth potential to $200 million. This seemed like an incredible figure at the time, and it was the first time I felt like we were entering the big leagues. But to our surprise, Frontier's investment committee rejected the deal, even though Dmitry assured us that he had defended it vigorously. The committee had judged it too risky. Immediately upon learning this, I wrote the second fund that we would agree to an investment of $2.5 million in 2 tranches, at a valuation of $7.5 million for 33% of the company. We signed a term sheet right away, were approved by their investment committee, and went through their due diligence process in just a couple weeks. This wasn't difficult, as our company was only about a year old, and all our payments were done in compliance with the law between our company and Russian LLCs and individual entrepreneurs. After that step, the fund confirmed their intent to invest in us, with the condition that we register a company in Cyprus as the holder of the intellectual property. This was standard practice for Russian IT companies because highly advanced English law is applied in Cyprus, and because Russian court judgments are not always independent or objective, entrepreneurs run the risk of illegal business seizures. If you've got the will, money, and connections, a court case can be decided in your favor, or the security forces can be employed in the resolution of economic disputes. This represents a serious threat for any business. Such a risk is cause enough to abort any project, and is one of the key problems in expanding entrepreneurship in general in Russia. We created a company in Cyprus, officially transferred the intellectual property to it, and were ready to sign all the documents for the investment deal, when an unexpected problem arose. The bank account of the Russian company we had used before beginning talks with investors had about $100,000 in revenue. We didn't discuss this in our negotiations with the investors. The company was ours, so we considered this money to be ours, and were planning to put part of it toward bonuses for our team and transfer the rest back to Sinet. When the money was discovered, their investment director, with whom we'd been negotiating, suddenly took a very tough stance, demanding the transfer of the entire amount of the new Cyprus company. Moreover, while he had always been calm and polite up to now, he made this demand in a rude, emotional manner, even cursing at us. I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of cold water over my head. It wasn't even the money. It was the tone of communication. If the fund was treating us this way now, right at the start of our honeymoon, what would happen later? It was as if the friendly teddy bear face had been lifted to reveal a real bestial snarl beneath. It was unpleasant, and after thinking it over for a few days, I turned the investment down. The general partner got in touch to find out what had happened, apologized on behalf of his colleague, and asked if we could continue with the deal. But it was too late. I decided not to accept investments at that stage, and to develop the company using our own funds for the time being. In the startup crowd, among company founders, tech media, and experts, attracting investment is practically the main measure of valuation and success. The whole culture is focused on investment, and this attitude is supported by those in the business of investment: investors, lawyers, auditors, and consultants. New startups are specially created for investments, and the founders spend months or even years fundraising. If they do manage to find investment money, they'll burn through it in an attempt to develop their business, operating at a loss until the money runs out and the company goes belly up. The typical life cycle of startups looks like this: 1. Idea. 2. Minimal viable product, MVP. 3. Unsuccessful search for investment. And 4. Closure of company. In rarer cases, it goes like this: 1. Idea. 2. MVP. 3. Search for investment. 4. Get funding. 5. Blow through funding. 6. Unsuccessful search for more investment. And 7. Closure of company. But if you really think about it, investment at the initial stage of a company's development is more of a failure than a success. It's like you're admitting that the company has insufficient internal resources for small-scale development, and the founders lack the minimum resources necessary to support their team at the stage of looking for a viable model, which means they also lack a successful entrepreneurial background. For that matter, founders should try to avoid investment at the company's subsequent stages of development as well, unless absolutely necessary, such as when the company could miss out on significant opportunities due to insufficient funds of its own. Among other things, the erosion of founder shares from investment is a serious pitfall. You often hear from startup gurus, and especially from investors, that it's better to have 10% in a billion-dollar company than 50% in a $100 million company. Actually, it's better to have 80% in a billion-dollar company. That goes double for Russia, where many wealthy people who are now venture investors and business angels first made their fortunes in the turbulent 1990s, during the emergence of capitalism. I wouldn't be surprised to find several numbers under Hitman in the contact lists on their phones. Every founder is tempted by the vision of an easy start for their young company, without all the money headaches. But it's better to operate on your own if you can find a way. And there almost always is one to be found. You should seek investment when you have a proven business model with healthy business fundamentals from reliable investors with a good reputation to accelerate your company's growth. I always wanted to visit Kazakhstan, a country whose people are related to the Yakuts. Our features are so similar that we must have been one nation at some point in the past. Those who spend a lot of time with different Asian ethnic groups have little trouble distinguishing Yakuts from Buryats, Mongols, or Koreans. and have no difficulty at all telling us apart from Chinese or Japanese people. But Yakuts and Kazakhs are almost indistinguishable. Whenever I'm in Kazakhstan, I always have the feeling that I'm in Yakutsk, resituated somehow far to the south. A very cool sensation. They all take me for one of their own. Kazakhs are split into 3 main groups, or zhus. There's a senior, middle, and junior zhus. I'm usually taken for a senior zhus, which is probably a good thing, because that group is currently in power. Kazakhs are warmer and less reserved than Yakuts, don't keep their distance from others as much as we do, and are generally more communicative and positive. But we have one thing in common: the desire to show off for others. You'll often see an ordinary Kazakh or Yakut going into debt and spending his last dime on a fancy car, a smartphone, and a fur coat for his wife. When I arrived in Almaty, I was struck by how streetcar ride-hailing worked there. No one ever called the service. They just walked out and hailed a car with a wave of their hand, as people used to do in Russian cities before internet aggregators and large chains came onto the scene. But, unlike in Russia, where you sometimes had to wait quite a while before hailing a ride, as soon as you raised your hand in Kazakhstan, a car would stop in front of you, maybe even 2 or 3 at a time. The cars behind the first one would wait in the hope that the passenger and driver would fail to reach an agreement on price. Everyone works as taxi drivers on the side. Even drivers of expensive SUVs pick up passengers on their way to or from work and earn a couple hundred tenge. I saw a similar situation in the capital city of Nur-Sultan, still Astana at the time, bolstered by a climate even more conducive to taxi use. With winter temperatures reaching -45 degrees Fahrenheit and strong winds, people preferred to get around in cars. Moreover, in this ambitious and rapidly growing city that calls itself the Dubai of the North, the average income is higher, and people can afford to take taxis. There weren't any ride-hailing aggregators yet in Kazakhstan in 2014, and when I got back, I told my teammates that we had to launch there. It would be either a complete failure or a resounding success. I was struck by just how much people use taxis, and the fact that almost every single car owner also worked as an occasional taxi driver. After going through the necessary preparatory steps, which were pretty much the same as for a launch in a Russian city, given the prevalence of the Russian language in Kazakhstan and the people's use of familiar platforms like VK.com, we launched our service in Astana in December 2014. That was InDriver's first foray out of Russia, and we chose the largest city at that time. The Kazakh capital had about 1 million inhabitants. We waited with bated breath to see how the city would react. As we watched, an amazing picture gradually began to take shape. InDriver took off in a matter of weeks. There were several contributing factors: a free market, the aforementioned custom of drivers picking up passengers, the relative financial security of the residents, widespread smartphone ownership, the Kazakh love for bargaining and saving money, and users' enthusiastic discussion of this new company with their social circle. It was also the first time that people perceived InDriver as cutting-edge Western tech from Russia, ignoring the fact that Yakutia is quite a bit east of Kazakhstan. We were like the iPhone entering a crowd of outdated flip phones. Our app versus the practice of hailing a cab from the curb. The passengers were riding in pretty much the same cars as before. It was just the method of access that had changed. Astana was a major success for InDriver and inspired the team even more. I had a free day in Almaty, so I signed up for a 1-day Arsen coaching seminar led by Marilyn Atkinson, student of the famous psychotherapist Milton Erickson and founder of Erickson Coaching International. This was an extraordinary stroke of luck, especially because I went to the training without knowing anything about coaching. I was just continuing on with my systematic work and personal growth. Coaching, in its classic form, is motivational psychology, a powerful and effective tool. While traditional psychology explores a subject's past, coaching looks towards the future, employing the safest possible psychological techniques. I liked the seminar and Atkinson herself, and I decided to take the training course to become a certified coach in the Moscow branch of Arsen Coaching International. It took me about 4 months and was mostly done remotely with several in-person sessions. This was the best of all the various courses and seminars I'd ever taken. We learned a lot of theory and fascinating techniques for visualizing the future and finding answers to questions when you don't know what to do or what choice to make. As part of my training, I conducted over 100 coaching sessions with students, friends, acquaintances, and strangers who responded to my blog post calling for participants. This whole process was very valuable for me as well, in terms of the development of my communication skills and emotional intelligence, i.e., empathy. But the key takeaway for me was a clear and precise understanding of how motivation works, which is essential for any entrepreneur and leader. I found the Dilts pyramid, the pyramid of logical levels, to be the most effective instrument. According to this model, people commit all their most important and meaningful actions based on their sense of identity and their values. That is, if you sincerely consider yourself a hero, and committing noble deeds and exploits is important to you, then you will do them with great energy and motivation, while subconsciously or consciously putting yourself in an environment where such exploits are possible. Conversely, our environment motivates us to a much lesser degree. Imagine a person stuck in an elevator. His environment, the broken elevator, will determine, but not inspire, his actions. He'll pull out his smartphone to try to call for help, or kill time until he is rescued. The most valuable resource in this situation is time, and the loss of it will provoke growing feelings of frustration. The most appropriate self-identification in this scenario is that of an unlucky person, which is not a powerful or motivating position. When they explained this model to us in the course, everything suddenly fell into place for me. The puzzle that I'd been struggling so painfully with during my personal crisis came together in front of my eyes. To find meaning in my life, I needed to answer the question, who am I? I needed to find my true identity and mission in life and determine my key values. From there, according to the Dilts pyramid, I would understand what to do and how, where to live, and what type of people I wanted to interact with. This would serve as motivation and be a powerful source of strength. The importance of finding yourself can't be overstated. Without that knowledge, it's as if you're wandering around in a thick fog or floating with the current in an unknown direction. When you find yourself, you have a clear understanding of which direction to take, what to do, and why you need to do it. You begin to cut away the unnecessary parts of your personality, no longer trying to be what you are not, and in the end, achieve greater harmony. And harmony in life is the foundation of happiness. Many famous philosophers and psychologists have written about the search for the self and finding oneself. Carl Jung, with his concept of individuation, saw the vital importance of human drive to achieve wholeness and balance of the self. Daniel Levinson introduced the idea of the dream, positing that the personal development we experienced is influenced by our own aspirations. Abraham Maslow used the term self-actualization to describe his ideas. At the end of the Arsen course, I passed the exam and was certified as an official coach. I set aside time over the next several months to consider who I was, as well as the goals and meaning behind everything I did. I thought over my past, sketched out different options, visualizing ideas and using metaphors. Finally, one day, insight struck. I recalled a message I'd received for one of Sinette's first company anniversaries. "You've done great, but don't stop growing. It's like riding a bicycle. If you stop, you'll fall down." I liked this metaphor so much that we incorporated it into our first official slogan, stability through development. We started putting it everywhere with the company name and logo. Then, what did I do many years later to find my way out of a personal crisis? I decided to work on personal development. I set up a lifogram, took training courses, and did psychological exercises, mastering a high volume of new knowledge. It worked. Why was I interested in doing what I do as an entrepreneur? Money was never my main goal. First, freedom was important to me. I wanted to do what I found interesting. Okay, the key word was interesting. So, what was interesting to me? What did the seemingly quite disparate endeavors of my professional life have in common? Transforming a small website into the #1 regional portal in the country by percentage of use per region. Turning unknown players from a remote corner of the country into some of Russia's top esports athletes. And taking a regional university and helping it evolve into one of the country's few federal universities? Why was supporting independent journalism important to me? Why did I stay in Yakutia instead of emigrating? The answer to all these questions was one key word: development. I am deeply invested in promoting the development of the things I care about, in building something huge, brilliant, and excellent from nothing. This inspires me, my team, and many others, giving us strength and energy. And I'm the one helping to make it happen, a developist, a true believer in development's power and opportunities. That's the word that best describes my sense of self and my personal mission. This was an amazing discovery for me, one of the most important I've ever made. Moreover, the insight didn't stop there. If development inspired my team as well, then maybe this mission applied to them as well? Perhaps Annette was a development company staffed by developists? The answer to that was a resounding yes, a direct hit, right in the bullseye. We were developists, and it was important to us to assist in the development and improvement of everything around us, starting with ourselves, then the company and its projects, moving further out, our home region of Yakutia, and even further out, the whole world. All our projects are really about the development of something, whether it's a new site or career training for orphan children in IT or commercial projects. With the portal, for example, we provide small businesses an effective platform to advertise their services, giving our users a way to order sushi, pizza, or hail a car ride through our quick and accessible platform. We are developing our city, country, and the world, and ourselves as well. When I grasped my mission and my company's mission, in essence, finding myself, I was able to finally emerge from my crisis. I was able to meet the challenges life threw at me.